Good day everybody and welcome back. I'm actually doing this a bit early this week, and that's definitely not because I woke up at about 2 a.m. to watch this episode live. Definitely not. Anyway, so this was a really roleplay heavy episode, and it had a lot of lore elements to it, which were pretty interesting in the long run. We picked up right after they had finished discussing their business with the wizard. I still don't remember his name. They said it a few times and I just forgot to write it down, so oops, sorry about that. But we also discovered that in some sky cities they don't have seasonal weather because it's all controlled by mages. Which was kind of just to set up this gag where Lucius complained about the cold. And they then had to explain to him that mages do not control the weather in the lowlands. And all of that good stuff. Soon after that, they decide that they are going to immediately use the money that they got to fix Arvel's leg, and thus they go to collect him. Mark had tweaked his cure injury spells though, and it ended up costing about 400 gold instead of the 300 proposed. Arvel looked incredibly bored when they came to pick him up. Yusuf and Corin were off working to earn some money for their journey, and Quill offers to pay to help them out, as you would expect him to. We find out that Gold Throne is, I believe it's 7 days away on wagon/horseback, and they discuss maybe clearing the roads of whatever the trouble with the trade routes has been to make that journey a little bit safer. And Arvel points out that if they're going to do that, then they may as well get paid for it. On the way to get his leg fixed, they are approached by a farmer who first inquires what their name is. Like, he had assumed that they were a mercenary band and wanted to know their name. This is possibly because Mark was like, yeah, it doesn't really make sense for people to not have a group name, or at least for people who have heard of them to not give them a group name, just because it makes more sense to refer to them by one name than refer to them each individually when trying to describe them to other people. So, that happened. He also asks for some gold to help fix his house. Lucius basically immediately agrees to pay him and gives him 20 gold in exchange for creating a bulletin to allow the citizens of Rose Hall to decide on their group name. Arvel also suggests making a group name, which does sort of indicate that Mark is like hinting at, hey, you guys should have a name. Yeah, really. Name this time, please. As it will actually make spreading word of their deeds easier if they intend to travel together for a relatively long time. As they continue on their way, they're constantly petitioned by other villagers asking them for gold for various reasons, and which does give Nova a very interesting worldview. She appears to be neutral in nature based on this. I don't know if it's like true neutral or lawful neutral or what, but she wants to help, but she doesn't want to quote-unquote disturb the natural order. Which is a very odd way of putting it, but, you know, to each their own. Lucius ends up having a surprisingly good idea about giving Rosalina some money and allowing her to divvy up the gold to whoever needs it the most, like some sort of charity idea type thing. So after that, they decide to split up to deal with those two different tasks. Sentry and Nova go to heal Arvel's leg. It appears to either have a 30-minute cast time or be cast as a ritual that takes 30 minutes. Torval, that's the Sunbringer, so the priest in the town, is perhaps a bit more powerful than he appears, or at least Arvel appears to believe so, wondering why he is in Rose Hall. Nova ends up asking the Sunbringer if he could teach her the heal injury spell. He politely declines, but he does consider it if he receives some sort of sign that she's perhaps worthy of learning the spell. A sentry also takes this opportunity to ask him about the oath that she took in her dream or memory. It does explain the basic nature of a paladin oath and what it may have perhaps granted her, but he doesn't really have any information beyond that. Lucius and Quill run into Valor on their way to talk to Rosalina. She's full of questions on what happened in Dwellin' Den, of course, and at the mentioning of the Echo, Valor asks Lucius how his magic works, because apparently her magic works in a very similar way. She was apparently assumed to have originally been a wild magic sorcerer, which is what I had originally guessed as well. But it appears that isn't the case, actually. and she appears to have some sort of innate ability to siphon energy off of magic items that she comes into contact with, causing a surge of energy and explosion, if you will. I'm not going to lie, with Valor around, Lucius is kind of like a small child with a friend asking if they can come along to do all sorts of things, like, hey, can my friend come do this? Hey, can John come do this? Etc, etc. She ends up leading them to an abandoned watchtower as to discuss why she ended up in the temple. She apparently has no memory from before she was 4 or 5 years old, which is curious. Like, I only have vague memories of when I was little, sure, but absolutely no memory seems a little bit weird. The first memory was in a dark room or some sort of dark place where the doors were opened and people with robes of Siaska coming in and telling her what her name was, and she grew up within their sort of clerical system. She was treated a bit differently from the other orphans that they had in the system, though, as she had lessons to control her magic, and she wasn't allowed to interact with the others all that much. I get the feeling that Valor is related to either Starbane or Siaska. I'm not sure which. I'm leaning more towards Starbane, as her magic is all purple, where the clerics of Siaska, their magic is very silvery in color, so... And given Tiangong's reaction to Valor back in the episode where she picked him up after retrieving him from the Wild Elves, I really want to say that she is related to Starbane, because there was that sense of fear that doesn't really make sense, even if she was siphoning power. We learned that elves in Aerois aren't super long-lived, they only live to be about 150, so that's an interesting change. They get back to the tavern, and they talk to Rosalina about opening the charity fund. She agrees to it, and Lucius suggests setting up a charity in Gold Throne to replenish the funds by setting up sort of a network-type system. But they open the charity with 200 gold in the pot. The names that the town had suggested for them are on the wall. They're not very good names, to be perfectly honest. Like, there's the Dwalin Delvers, the Rich Folk, and 2 women, 1 elf, a robot, and a bird. A little bit later, they end up meeting Brett Brookstone, who seems rather well kept. Lucius convinces him to donate 50 gold into the charity fund, which he seems to, but perhaps he didn't really. But he was a bit too open about how much money they had and what they'd been up to, so Sentry picked him up and moved him away before his blabbering could cause any more damage. Rosalina is suspicious of the donation, of course, given how the Brookstone family tends to act. However, he does invite the party to come to dinner the following evening. They mention Dace's financial situation in response to that, basically setting up like, oh yeah, we might come, but we'll be busy dealing with Dace's issue. And that made him flinch a little, because he is the one that is technically chasing her for money. Just before the end of the session, Nova asks Quill about the enchanted hammer they found. She wanted to borrow it to see what she could do with it since Tiangong wanted it. I am a little bit confused by this, because the way Mark describes it, it is like it's Pact of the Blade, but she's very clearly a Pact of the Tome warlock, so I'm not sure where that's going. Actually, I had asked Mark about this on Twitter, and as it turns out, it is just a case of he was getting it confused with the Hex Warrior feature from the Hexblade. Either way, Lucius touches Tiangong, and he has a very similar insight as to when he interacted with the Echoes. He sensed a sentience, and he saw an image of space. He heard a male voice say Chromat to him before he was shunted back into reality. Which I find really interesting, because that means that not only can Lucius feel magic and sentience and interact with memories of magical beings, but they can also sense things about him as it sensed his source of power, or rather how his magic worked. So I'm really curious to see where the next session is going to go. It's not next week, unfortunately, so I don't know what I'll be doing. Probably nothing. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, let me know. If you disagree with any of my points, then please also let me know. Tell me how I can improve if you want to. Cheers. I might see you next time. Bye.